Hey, I'm Anthony Romano, and this is a Q&A video where I'm answering questions from one of the posts I put up on my page. So if you haven't seen that post, I encourage you to subscribe and click the notification bell, because then you'll get notified for all my posts, and maybe I'll answer some of your questions on a video. So this was, I left it open-ended, and I got a variety of questions on keto, bodybuilding, fitness, health, and things of that nature. So, of course, I was expecting some other personal stuff as well, but I'm going to dive into this and try to answer everything as best as I can in as short of time as possible. So you're going to learn a lot, and I encourage you to watch the video till the end because there's a variety of questions that may be different from one another's. Let's get into the video, and like it as well, because that will make YouTube show my content to more people, and that's all you have to do to help me grow my page. If you don't want to share the stuff or send it to somebody you know who could benefit from it, like it. That's all you have to do. Let's get into it. So, before I get into this video, I also offer consults, action plan consulting. So basically, everything I'm going to answer in this video, this is like, you'll see that I'm cutting myself off whenever I'm getting too long or too detailed, because this is a video. If you want to work one-on-one with me on my website, I have a Skype call where I will answer every single question you have with as most detail so that you understand it, and then by the end of the process, we will make an action plan for you, and basically, it won't be pretty and dolled up like a lot of my long-term coaching plans are, but you will have absolutely everything you need and all the protocols necessary to, take action immediately and get to your goals. So you'll see that I'm, sometimes I'll get a little bit too nuanced and I'll cut myself back a bit here because this is meant for a variety of people, a large audience, and not just one. So, okay, so let's get into the questions here. So the first one I have is from Muhammad Salami, and basically this one's a keto bodybuilding question essentially. It says, I'm now 4 months on keto and everything is great, but I can't find what is the best way to train with weights in keto. My main target is burning fat. And also thank you for your work. Appreciate you, Muhammad. Thank you. So as far as the question goes, training on keto, I've made a lot of videos on this, but the main attitude you want to bring into the gym is train the same way you normally train. So if you normally trained, intense circuit style, start training intense circuit style. Granted, the first month of keto, when you're getting adapted, it's not going to be easy and you probably shouldn't push it, okay? So don't push things in the beginning. But after you are adapted, the goal is to train the same way you normally do. And unless you're a powerlifter who's doing competitive meets where you're doing 1 rep maxes, that's the only time where perhaps it's not the most optimal. You can bodybuild very effectively on a ketogenic diet, and you don't need the carbohydrates coming in because you're making them. You're making more than enough to fill up your glycogen stores and fuel your brain. So essentially, when we're talking about training on keto, it's going to be the same, and your body simply has to adapt to it. So even with some people who are competitive athletes that I've worked with, the main thing is after somebody's adapted, by training the same way you normally do, you're teaching your body that it has to pick up the slack. It has to start basically making the same metabolic adaptations that it would when you were on a carb metabolism. And from there, that's where, after you've unlocked that, you can start strategically using carbs as an option for you. Because a lot of people, they'll do keto and they'll train, they feel at first, because it's so much more of a shock to their body, they'll train with a little bit less intensity. And then they find they have to include carbs to train well. If you get adapted, you will not need the carbs. They will simply be a luxury for you, exactly as they were in nature for our ancestors. Okay? So that's a simple answer to that one. But the best way to train, I would say, is if you're talking fat burning and if you're talking fat burning, it's going to be moderate intensity, lots of repetitions. If you're talking muscle building, moderate to high intensity, lots of repetitions, similar to emphasizing time under tension, as my other videos explain. So, next question is Jonathan J. It says, what happens when you overeat? Does your body decide to turn it all into fat and the gluttony? So, here's the thing. For this question, the answer is it depends what you overate. So, a lot of people, like I always say, they make things a quantitative analysis. They say, oh, it's all about total calories. But that implies that your body treats every macro the exact same way, every food the exact same way. It ignores the qualitative side of the coin. And as I always say, the qualitative side of the coin is looking at the individual hormones and effects that each foods cause, and then approaching the diet by only focusing on that. So example, keto, if you cut out all carbs, you're cutting out all the most insulinogenic foods. So from there, you're isolating a hormone and you're acting on that. You're not acting on the total quantity at first, you're acting on the quality. And granted, either one of these sides works, but eventually you will plateau after your body balances out, and you have to integrate the other. So after keto, you have to start to lower the calories after the first few months, the first 30 pounds of fat loss that you get from not counting calories. From the quantitative side of the coin, eventually you have to start doing arduous amounts of cardio, more workouts, and basically working on that insulin more, because if you included carbs in your diet before, you weren't really isolating it as much, you were just focusing on the total energy amount. So when we're talking about what does your body do with extra macros, it really depends on what you overate. If somebody overate protein, and let's say they ate 3,000 calories worth of protein, it would be very difficult to store all of that as fat. Now granted, when you have combinations of certain macros like sugar and fat, the rates of de novo lipogenesis, which is building new fat, will be increased. But to give you an example here, when you overeat protein, your liver is only going to convert a certain amount of that protein into sugar. Your body cannot store protein as fat. So the thing is, when you have, a large amount of protein coming in, only a small percent of that is going to be converted into sugar, and from there, perhaps it could be stored as body fat. But the thing is, it's such a small amount of sugar that it's unlikely that your body's going to store it as fat. So in that case, we know protein is not going to be as likely to store body fat. With fat in general, if there's no insulin present, it's less likely to cause that fat storage, but you can still gain body fat. So this is again where the modern diets that people have nowadays that are inclusive of both carbs and fat create a much higher likelihood of fat storage when we're talking in isolation, because when you have insulin and sugar coming in and then you have fat, you have the resource and the key, and that's going to create a much higher likelihood of storing body fat. However, the quantitative analysis is the threshold for that. That's why it's such a good tool to keep track of your calories, because even if you don't have to worry about macro combinations if you keep your calories in check. But at the same time, if you overdo your calories, you have to look at the quality of your foods, look at the macros to determine whether or not they, are more likely to be stored as body fat. So it doesn't turn everything into fat. It also depends on the foods. There's this cascade of hormonal reactions that take place. In general, if somebody overeats sugar, it's going to be much more likely that they'll store body fat. But if somebody is not having sugar and they overeat fat, it's on the whole less likely to store body fat because there's a lack of insulin present. Now, you can still store body fat without insulin, but the thing is, you would have to overeat severely to do that. So, next question. That's a decent enough answer for that one. Watch my other videos. What's my favorite gym split? Joe Childers. I'll get to that one in a second. Actually, you know what? I'll answer this one right away. Also, would it be detrimental to do high-intensity training such as insanity while in ketosis? So similar answer to the question from Mohammed. Basically, it's not a problem to do high-intensity activity on keto. Not at all. And this is why I do, keto for 9 years. Chances are I've done a lot of high-intensity activity during those times. The thing is, high-intensity activity actually produces ketosis. This is something people don't talk about. Whenever you burn off your glucose, you start to produce more ketones, okay? So I'm making a video that's not out yet on forcing ketosis, because basically, there's many parts of the day where you start producing more ketones, you're just not in nutritional ketosis. So why does the body produce ketones when you run out of glucose? Because if you were being chased by a bear and you ran out of glucose, you need the emergency fuel. Well, not realistically, carbs the emergency fuel, but you need the other burner to go on, okay? And from there, ketones, which are a great fuel for the brain, are a fuel that could perhaps be better for, the most dire scenarios. Granted, you're still going to be using some carbohydrate at that point, but the combination of the two, the ketones and carbs, is basically one of the most powerful solutions you can have. And if you are fat adapted, you will have enough carbohydrate that your body's producing for itself, and then you have the benefit of ketosis, which is a better sustainable energy source. So your body's going to produce ketones as a survival measure, because if you didn't do them, that bear would catch you and eat you. So, and you wouldn't have procreated, your ancestors, you wouldn't be here because your ancestors wouldn't have survived. So it's absolutely a mechanism we have. But back to answering the question, when we're looking at, is it okay to do high intensity training? Hell yes it is, and people will tell you that you can't because it's glycolytic. But all the people who tell you glycolytic activity is not possible on keto ignore the fact that A, your body makes glycogen on keto, your body this is gluconeogenesis, and granted, it's not ass loads of glycogen. You're not, jamming your muscle stores like you would by eating an entire pizza. But you have an adequate amount, and your body's going to use it more efficiently. So you're able to use it just as effectively as somebody on a carb diet. Watch my video on keto making people use carbs better. better. And you will see that realistically, after somebody is adapted, they have the ability to train hard. And this is why in my videos, I'm doing stuff that people would consider intense glycolytic activity. I'm curling 60 pounds, throwing up 200 plus pounds on the bench for reps, things like that. Those are, and also playing soccer. I would go into soccer games 3 days fasted. I would do all those things. So the thing is, it's absolutely possible. You just have to get adapted. And also my favorite gym split. So as far as the insanity question though, yes, you can absolutely do it, but for the first month, it's going to be hard. After the adaptation, it will be far easier. So my favorite gym split, I always cycle things up. So I would say a lot of times it's always going to be at minimum. All I care about is hitting everything twice a week. So sometimes if that means it is a push-pull legs type of thing, I will add a push-pull legs and arm day as a dessert day type of thing. A lot of time, I don't really have a favorite split that way, but I always prioritize the compound lifts, the key compound lifts, and because I'm training everything twice a day, I'll have days where there's a lot of emphasis on isolations. So as an advanced lifter, you want to focus more on the isolations in addition to the compounds. But if you're a newbie, you want to focus more on the compounds. So when we're talking about my favorite split, I mean, it's generally going to be maybe a chest and triceps, back and biceps, and, you know, legs and abs type of thing. Just something to make it easier to hit everything. That's kind of how I do it, and then I just repeat that. I generally do a 4-day split, and I'll repeat 3 of the workouts. So hopefully that made enough sense. Question here from Jerry Whittle. Do I need to feed my gut biome? Milk, kefir, greens, etc., or will keto be sufficient for good health? So keep in mind, your gut microbiome, I've spoken about this in a lot of other videos, is absolutely essential. Your gut is your second brain. Your gut has receptors similar to your neural... Actually, there's neural receptors in your gut, just like your brain. Funny little side note here as I'm coming back editing this video. There's an interesting question from scientists asking, is the human body electrical or is it chemical? And as I like to break things down and kind of get philosophical with them, in my opinion, the brain in your head is the electrical brain. Of course, there's chemical processes as well, but your stomach is more so the chemical brain because you have these receptors, these interplay between signalers with bacteria, providing this sort of chemical source of signaling to other neurons that way. Whereas in the brain, you have it electrically going on, like binary code between your synapses. So it's pretty interesting because your gut is like the chemical brain. Your stomach is like the electrical brain. That's generally just an interesting way to look at things as well, I think. So the gut is absolutely very important, and hopefully that example stresses to you how important it is. There's a funny question I remember writing about in like philosophy papers in school, which was like, is your stomach just a tool for your brain to like assimilate nutrients and, you know, feed you, or is your brain just a tool for your stomach and the stomach is really running everything? So I think that's kind of an interesting way to look at things because your stomach is absolutely the second brain. So you have to feed your gut microbiome, and there's a lot of ways to do this. Of course, acquiring probiotics through natural foods and supplements is necessary. And then feeding the good bacteria, the probiotics, with prebiotics is going to be beneficial from time to time. But it's more so about the diversity of the species you have, to make it very simple, and the variety of the good kind. Okay? So as far as feeding it beneficially, there's lots of ways people incorporate raw foods. Okay? I will have plenty of raw foods throughout the year. So messed up stuff like raw livers and stuff like that. That's what I do, but I don't make videos on that as much. But it has to be a grass-fed liver, etc. My friends joke around with me about that. So essentially, when we're talking about feeding the gut microbiome, easier way to do this that doesn't require you to be a savage is get a good probiotic supplement with a good variety of bacteria, nothing too high at first because it might upset your stomach. The biggest way to impact your gut bacteria is keto, because it's going to depopulize the variety of species in your gut that are dependent on sugar. So granted, you're still going to be having some sugar through your bloodstream and through your liver conversion. So at the same time, your gut bacteria has to starve from the absence of sugar. Okay? So when we're talking about, you know, improving your gut microbiota, getting rid of sugar is going to kill a lot of the bad guys. Okay? So that's one simple way. But from there, you want to build up the good guys. So probiotics is a good way to do this, and raw meats and stuff like that, and other raw foods. And of course, getting in some, you know, vegetables that have prebiotic fiber is also beneficial to feed the beneficial bacteria. So hopefully that's a short enough answer for that one. Okay, so this question's from Jerry Moss. I've heard around that fat-free dairy products should be avoided due to the high insulin spike response of consuming. Is spiking insulin only an issue when you're consuming excess amounts of sugar at the same time? And also she adds that she has PCOS and severe insulin resistance, and essentially she's curious about, is excess insulin going to be the problem here? So for starters, you have to realize spiking sugar is the primary cause of excess insulin, okay? And every woman I've worked with PCOS, it absolutely high insulin and bad insulin sensitivity, so borderline insulin resistance. So that's a common thing with PCOS, and ultimately fixing it comes down to reducing the insulin resistance. So when we're talking about fat-free dairy products, they're not going to make that big of a difference in the big picture, because essentially whenever there's a fat-free product, it just means that they raised the sugar instead, and they sold you on the fact that, oh, it doesn't have fat. And if you buy into the cholesterol lipid hypothesis, which has been basically never been proven, then companies can sell you fat-free products. But a lot of times it's an excuse for companies to put in more sugar and increase how addictive the food is. So that would be a good reason to avoid it. And any insulin spike that comes from that is going to come from the sugars added in. Sugar is the biggest spiker of insulin. This is why the ketogenic diet works, because it removes sugar, and then your insulin drops so much that even people who aren't counting calories at first lose weight for the span of months. So that would absolutely... So is spiking insulin only an issue when you're consuming excess amounts of sugar? They're synonymous. I'm not going to say they're the same, but they're synonymous. So, at the same time, spiking insulin is only a problem when somebody's not metabolically fit for it. So essentially, if somebody is overweight, spiking insulin is going to play into problems. It's going to create more inflammation. At the same time, it's going to put... There's other problems that aren't necessarily because of the insulin, like your arteries will experience more damage because of all the sugar coming through. Not necessarily because of the insulin, but you get where I'm going with this. It's a cascade of problems, and the simple solution is to isolate the insulin. And as far as PCOS goes, you're going to want to reduce that insulin resistance. That is the number one ticket. Doctors will tell women with PCOS they cannot fix it. I have fixed it with women. It is not something that's out of the question. Now, granted, if somebody is, very far down the line, like super obese, then it's a lot harder to really experience the abilities to have children again, things of that nature. But you get where I'm going with this. It is not something that's unfixable for a lot of women. Now, if a diabetic person starts keto, should they go below 20 carbs due to insulin resistance? So I answered this question a little bit already for Lala the Scorpion. Cool name, by the way. Type 2s should absolutely focus on eliminating starches and fruits, okay? But the thing is, you don't necessarily have to put a quantitative measurement on it. You don't have to say necessarily 20 carbs, okay? It's more about the quality. And for people with diabetes, it's absolutely about the quality, because what they need the most is isolating insulin and getting a better sensitivity to it. So that's kind of the theory, the philosophy behind helping people with type 2 diabetes. For type 1s, it's a bit more complicated. And basically, I've worked with more type 1s informally, but lots of type 2s in a professional, very formal environment. So I will tell you that it's more so about the quality and eliminating certain foods rather than putting a total quantity metric on it. Because, example, if somebody gets their carbs only from green vegetables, then it doesn't matter if you have 20 grams or if you have 50 grams. Your body's not going to experience a blood sugar spike from it. Granted, you're going to have a lot of fiber, and however that bloats you up or however you digest that, some people digest it very well. If you don't, then it would be a problem. But realistically, for ketogenic purposes, it's not a problem at all. So it's not about a metric. It's about the quality of the foods and eliminating the right ones. Next question from Tony McKenney, I'm guessing, because there's no vowels in his last name. But I know I've seen his comments all the time. Good dude. So, can you explain what are the best IF hours to preserve muscle mass, like 16-8 or 36-hour fast? And also, he's curious about the glycogen supercompensation video. It's going to be up in a little bit. So, best fasting windows to preserve muscle mass. Here's the starting point. The starting point is, if somebody's keto adapted or ketogenic, you're not really risking any muscle loss at all. And I am living proof of this, because you've seen, I've documented my 7-day fast. I've documented 5-day fast. I've documented some of these fasts that I've done throughout this year, even only, and it doesn't look like I've lost any muscle. And one of the videos I'm putting out is going to demonstrate that a little bit more soon. How my full year of keto bodybuilding transformation progress video. It's going to be out soon. So, when we're talking about preserving muscle mass, if somebody's coming from a carbohydrate metabolism and they're not adapted to keto at all, basically they run a higher risk because their body's currently running on glucose. And if they burn out of glucose, basically gluconeogenesis from muscle protein stores in the presence of an insulin spike and cortisol is much more likely to churn through muscle mass. Okay, so that was a lot to throw at you there. But essentially, if somebody is coming from a carb metabolism, they can convert protein into carbs, which is their body's primary energy source. To do that, they're much less likely to use body fat because they're not as adept at churning through it. Okay, it's not going to be through enhanced keto fat metabolism, it's going to be through beta oxidation. So when we're talking about somebody who's risking muscle loss, of course, a lot of athletic people, their body will get used to those tasks they're doing. But when we're looking at the other factors that make it a risk, it's an insulin spike. Cortisol, so stress hormone in the presence of insulin, is not going to target muscle tissue. It is not. So if you fast, then basically, even if you train your ass off, if you have low insulin, that is going to be protective of your muscle tissue, because think about it. If we did not have that ability, you would not have survived. Your ancestors would not be here. It's an evolutionary adaptation, because if our ancestors had to perform when there was no food and they just lost all their muscles, we would die. So granted, they were not consuming fruit smoothies all day. They were not having the modern American standard US Western diet, and they did not have insulin spikes in the presence of their cortisol, in the presence of their fasts. So as far as if somebody's actually on keto or doing lots of fasting regularly, you're not really risking any muscle loss, and it takes days to really break down muscle on a sort of fasting regime. Because again, the longer somebody fasts, yes, the body would start to break down muscle tissue if somebody goes for weeks, right? But the thing is, that's like that for a reason, because fasting is the preservation state. If you didn't have food, your body will not churn through everything. If all of a sudden the power goes out and it's like the day after tomorrow, that movie, and you have to live at your home with no electricity, you're not going to start burning your sofa. You're going to start burning random wood and shit that you can burn in your house, okay, to fuel yourself and keep yourself warm. So realistically, it's not an issue if somebody's keto adapted, and realistically they wouldn't see any muscle loss until maybe after a week, or unless if they're very athletic, longer time span than that. Hopefully that answered the question generally enough. Okay, so question from Emperor Sheev here. Appreciate all your comments, Emperor. What is the best and healthiest way to get an elderly family member on keto? Although not diagnosed, I believe she is severely insulin resistant. All of a sudden she has an influx of health problems like memory loss, cataracts, and same time has developed a craving for more sweet foods. Help me, Anthony Romano. You're my only hope. Shades of, Star Wars with that one. But thank you, Emperor Sheev. So it's absolutely some sort of, as people get older and they're still craving sweet foods like sugar, it's generally, their insulin sensitivity is not going to be, the least I can say is it's not the most optimal it could be, okay, especially if they're experiencing problems like that. So it's very difficult to get somebody who's stuck in their ways to do something different with anything. And, as far as getting somebody who could benefit from keto to start doing it, the thing is, you generally have to take baby steps, but there are times to use bigger measures. So example, for most people who watch my videos, my number one recommendation to get into ketosis is jump into the pool. Start going 3 days without carbs, because if you start slowly titrating things down, you'll probably torture yourself. And if somebody's doing like a calorie diet where they're slowly doing that anyways, eventually they should make the jump. When we're talking about getting somebody who is elderly or older, in general, it's hard to get anybody to do anything differently. So it's not about forcing somebody to do something they don't want to do, but when you know that somebody could benefit from something like keto, of course it would be beneficial to help them implement it. And if you're certain of this person would benefit, then you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So at that point, it's all about speaking with them, communicating, of course, but even with people in my life, elderly people in my life who really could benefit, it's something that's difficult, and you just have to do little measures and take the best that you can get. So example, somebody with mental problems and whatnot, one recommendation would be start getting a C8 caprylic acid MCT oil, and if they have symptoms of mental decline or Alzheimer's or dementia, there's plenty of work that basically, one of them from Stephen Cunan and Mary Newport that I've read predominantly on treating mental decline with solely MCTs. So that's one way to dip your foot in the water for this person. But at the same time, it would come down to making the most actionable little steps. So example, if they're sweetening their coffee with these, okay, basically these little dextrose and saccharin packets, cutting those out at first and substituting them in for these stevia or monk fruit sweeteners is one good way to slowly make things easier, because even though I say for most people they should hop into ketosis, jump into the pool, right? That's for people who are already intent on doing keto, or trying it out, at least being open to trying it out. And I would rather them jump in and have 3 days of difficulty than have them slowly titrate things down for weeks and then already hate keto before they even start entering ketosis. So that's not something you want a person to experience. But if somebody's already very stuck in their ways, do little things you can do, like little steps you can do to help them start achieving some of the benefits without, fully diving into the deep end. So getting an MCT oil, C8 caprylic acid MCT, I just have everything on hand here, I guess. And cutting out little sweeteners that are going to cause addiction, blood sugar spikes, high dopamine reward response. Those are things that are key. Even if it comes down to somebody who doesn't want to change things, the least you can do is help them, instead of having Snickers bars, get them a Belgian chocolate bar, a clean, high quality, just sugar that's not going to be high fructose corn syrup, that's not going to be processed hydrogenated palm oil, canola oil, none of those things. That's the least you can do. And from there, they'll at least have more stable glucose. But granted, if you want to fully tap into reversing mental decline, it would have to be ketogenic. But, realistically, if the horse doesn't want to drink, it doesn't matter what pond you take him to. So that's just a little analogy there. So when we're talking about implementing this, it's absolutely something that the person has to want to do. And, if they're intent on it, then the easiest, if she's already on board, okay, then here's a different story. If she's already on board, then I would say basically, try to get, I would use a very supportive protocol, like MCTs already, to help produce the ketones as she's transitioning through the first few days of ketosis. Strict emphasis on removing the fruits at first, because you want to clear out her liver glycogen before you clear out the carbohydrates in muscle stores, which probably aren't that much if somebody's very elderly. So basically, you want to get them used to clearing out their liver glycogen, because most people can't tolerate that. So that's just a decent place to start. Hopefully that helped Emperor Shiv. So, other question here is from Trakam TV. How can you stop drinking coffee and not get hungry? I find that coffee is a good appetite suppressant, but I don't want to be reliant on it, and I find that I'm hungrier if I don't drink it. I guess I'm searching for that dopamine fix with food, and I was getting from coffee. So any suggestions as an alternative to coffee would be great. Very self-aware comment, my friend. So, basically you've kind of nailed a little bit of it, nailed the bottom of it there. It's, in one way, searching for a dopamine fix. So as far as nutritionally, something you can do, get more electrolyte in. So if somebody's really addicted to consuming coffee, chances are there's some sort of adrenal fatigue. If you consume more than 400, 500 milligrams of coffee a day, chances are you have a sort of adrenal fatigue. Granted, adrenal fatigue is not technically a medical term, but the adrenal glands basically don't actually get fatigued themselves. It's just that they're overworked and the body starts manifesting, problems in other ways. So when we're talking about reversing that, you want to take in, so I'm assuming that might be one of the root causes here, if you're consuming a lot. If you're not, I'll get into that. If you are consuming a lot, one thing you could do is first minimize the caffeine intake, but support yourself with sodium and potassium chloride. Okay, watch my videos on electrolytes, because your body, when you're creating all this cortisol, and when you're consuming all these diuretics, you're depleting and dehydrating your body of sodium. So right away, that already, a quarter teaspoon of sodium, quarter teaspoon of potassium, in chloride form, not in pill form, is basically going to help support yourself. Maybe you'll need a little bit more, but I don't want to recommend you too much because you might shit yourself. So from there, what you want to do is you want to start off with those two, you want to sip them, okay? And you could sip them, even if you don't mind, get over the taste or put in a little sweetener, right? You could sip them after one of your coffees or something like that, and you could slowly, reduce the coffees to around 200 to 300 milligrams a day. So that would be a more appropriate amount. If you find that you get lightheaded and dizzy when you're bending down and standing up, that's absolutely a surefire sign that you have adrenal fatigue. So, or at least, what I'm referring to as adrenal fatigue. So, on top of that, you also want to supplement with vitamin C in a high quality form. I have a link in the description, because your adrenals and your kidneys take up loads of vitamin C. They take up more vitamin C than any part of your body. And if it's a water soluble nutrient, and your kidneys are basically working hard all day long. So I'm assuming the problem is coming from the kidneys being overworked, and basically your body is not as good and not as responsive to cortisol, that you need that little kick all the time. But from there, the sodium potassium is one way to minimize the sort of need for it in the first place. But when we're talking about dopamine fix, I would say look into the other little kryptonites that are slipping into your diet. So example, even with that scenario I was explaining about elderly people or people in general who are using these sweeteners all the time, these yellow ones here that I just keep for demonstrating purposes in this video, look for little sources of these dopamine spikes. Dextrose is absolutely going to spike dopamine in your brain. And high fructose corn syrup, being sweetened in other foods that you are eating, is going to spike dopamine in your brain. Also, you could look into things like serotonin-based supplements, like 5-HTP or something. Obviously, get medical advice before that, or assess your, general neurotransmitter. Get an idea of yourself. You know you better than I do. And basically, from there, too much dopamine can lead to a lack of serotonin. They're sort of, reciprocal in some ways. So look into serotonergic supplements as well. But overall, I would say start with the kidneys, support them. And basically, if you're consuming coffee all the time, you're going to be dehydrated. That might increase the need for more of them. And yeah, that's a starting point from there. Also, there's other caffeine substitutes that I made a video on before, like some that I'm a real big fan of, like Zynamite, which is these guys by AZOTH. I have a discount code in the description, 15% off if you use my code. Literally, one of my favorite supplements out there entirely. It's one of the most, no crash, stimulatory, increases blood flow to the brain, literally killer supplement. And its natural ingredient comes from mango extract. And, it's just, there's other ways to substitute caffeine without sort of dysregulating neurotransmitters. Like some people will do high dose tyrosine, which basically can put things out of whack. But, there's other ways to sort of get that kick, and, perhaps even could be, and you know what, here's a book recommendation for you. The Mood Cure by Julia Ross. Read that one. It'll help you assess perhaps what you're low in, because from there, who knows, tyrosine could be a good substitute. But now I'm rambling, and this is what I do and answer absolutely everything in my consults. So go check out my consults, because I will make an action plan for you, and basically we can discuss every single question on your mind, and I will get way too detailed with it and make you understand every single nuance to it. So I think that's all I'm going to answer for this video. It was a lot. It was a long video, but I encourage you to like it, subscribe, and share, and ask me some more questions, and I will do more of these Q&A videos if you want them. So please let me know, and whenever I do another post like this, click the notification bell and ask me some questions. That's it for this video. I'm Anthony Romano. Peace. And if I didn't answer your question, don't worry. I'll answer it in another video. Peace.